All right. Hi, I just want to make sure, can you guys hear me? Okay, because I have on multiple microphones. Number one, I just want to say thank you so much for having me here. And I can totally tell the push that you guys give to social justice in your classrooms, because I spoke about I was pretty straightforward with the classes here today, and everyone was so open to everything that I was saying, and that speaks a lot, because that's not the case in every ed program. And so you really should be quite proud of what you do here at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I'm going to tell educators in Washington State or future educators that this might be a good option for studying to be a teacher. So thank you so much for everything that you do. So thank you for inviting me here this evening. And it's such an honor every time I have the pleasure to speak in front of returned Peace Corps volunteers, prospective Peace Corps volunteers, and educators and future educators. They're my favorite people of all time. So in a time when it can be difficult to make sense of the world, the Peace Corps gives me hope. Volunteers serve as ambassadors for the United States worldwide, and then bring back those experiences and share them with our nation. And this is true diplomacy. So people will tell you that the main job of the Peace Corps is like skills development, and I can't remember, but there's several things that the government, they like make everything, this does this and this does this, and diplomacy is not one that they say the Peace Corps does. But I would say that it's the primary job of a Peace Corps volunteer is to be a diplomat. And a diplomat who shows what's good about our nation and shares our culture, but also listens and learns when they go and visit other cultures and then brings that back. Its main goal is to create connections and relationships. So it's not really development. I mean, it is, because we do a lot of different jobs. There's English instruction, there's small business, there's environmental volunteers, there's agriculture, all kinds of different development tasks. But at the end of the day, and this was particularly true of my own service and the service of those who I've met, it was really about cultural exchange. And it was about creating relationships and providing experiences and learning from those experiences. And then coming back to the United States and being a better citizen. So, connecting cultures and recognizing the value and beauty in every community and every individual. That's what the Peace Corps does. So that's what I'm here to talk about. I'm going to talk about my Peace Corps experience and how it relates to being an educator, and then I'm going to talk about how it has impacted me not only in my classroom, but as I've grown as an educator and used my voice outside of my classroom. So Peace Corps is a wonderful example of seeking experience outside of our understanding. As an educator, I must intentionally seek experiences which challenge my perceptions and broaden my perspectives. Peace Corps was one such experience for me. My experience in Armenia as a teaching volunteer truly shifted my trajectory and influenced who I am and how I participate in the world. Ultimately, that experience brought me to where I am today. So I want to take a moment to focus us just for a moment. I want us to focus on the positive aspects of our experiences as students in school. Because as humans, we have this tendency to focus on what's not working in our lives. We really focus on, I don't like this aspect of my job, or I don't like this aspect of what's happening here. And I don't think that that's a great place to build from. I think that that makes us focus on what's not working, so then we work to try and circumvent or prevent that thing, instead of seeking the positive and the good, and then replicating what's already working. Because that's how we make things better. We don't make things better by trying to avoid the bad. We make things better by focusing, seeking the good, and then replicating that. So as an educator, I get to experience this facet of human nature all the time. People love to complain about schools. They love it. Students, parents, decision makers, community members, everyone has an opinion about school. Mostly because almost everyone's been a student. So they think they know what's going on. So in order to calibrate our mindsets a bit, moving into this evening, I want you to think back to your experience as a student. So think back, and some of you are students right now, and it's okay to think about your experience right now. So I want you to think all the way from the first moment you remember school, all the way up to the last time you were in school. And I want you to think about an educator whom you really connected with, someone who you really felt made an impact on you. So visualize that person, and again, it can be from any time in your education. So visualize that person. Once you have that person firmly in your mind, I want you to turn to your neighbor and share that experience, that person, with your neighbor. So go ahead. All right, finish your sentence. Waterfall. Shh. I just teachered you. Those of you who are future teachers, please take that back to your classrooms. Okay, so my educator was Mrs. Baker. So this is Miss Baker. And I had just moved for the third time in my young life. So I had moved from my city of Spokane to this small town outside of my city called Deer Park. And we had commuted into school, and it was like complicated. And I did that for a semester. And then we up and moved in the middle of the year down to Sacramento, California. I spent another semester in this little town of Somerset. And then right before middle school, I moved to Sacramento and started junior high. So already, like, that's like a million bad things right there. Moving several times, I didn't have any friends, I didn't know the environment, and it was very, very strange for me. So I had all of these things counting against me, plus I was puberty, and I was starting a new school, and it was middle school. But I knew as soon as I walked into Mrs. Baker's class, she was my English teacher, that everything was going to be okay. Because from the moment I walked into her door, I knew she believed in me. She looked straight at me, she smiled, she welcomed me into her classroom, and she was so happy that I was there. And from that moment, everything she did communicated how much faith she had in me as a student and as a human being, and that she truly believed in my potential. I can't remember a single thing that she taught that year, but I certainly remember how she made me feel. And every day in my career as an educator, I strive to be just like Mrs. Baker. Because when kids come into my classroom, all I see is endless potential. And that's exactly what she was. She saw that in every kid too. Every awkward, brace face, pimply middle school kid that walked into her room. And I truly believe that she brought me to this stage today. She's exactly the type of educator I strive to be. And if you think back to that teacher, so first of all, I love doing this activity because every time I watch, it starts like as a murmur, and everybody starts, and then as you get into your discussion and you're telling your story about this educator, slowly you're smiling, you're starting to get a little bit louder and excited. And by the end, everybody is just like beaming, because that's the power of a committed, kind, caring adult. And that's what my privilege is as an educator. That's what I get to be for kids. And that's what Mrs. Baker was for me. So throughout this evening, I want you to continue to think about that teacher, that educator you loved or with whom you really connected. I want you to sit with that person and let that memory expand and spread as we go through this talk tonight. And I want you to remember all the positive experiences you had while learning at school. Okay? I'd also like you to focus on that element of connection. Because just as I said about Mrs. Baker, that I don't remember what she taught me, but I definitely remember how she made me feel, I would venture to guess that the majority of you also remember your educator for the same reason. Now, I'm sure that there's one or two that are like, oh no, I know everything about chemistry now. But that's rare. Usually, you can't really remember what they taught you unless they required you to memorize the bones of the body, which I can still do. That was by a science teacher who I also loved. But it's really how they made you feel. I want you to remember that. Because in any situation, not just in school, but in any situation, it's the connections and the relationships we make with one another that really make the difference in each other's lives. Every student deserves to have an educator in their lives like the ones you talked about, who empowers them, shows them they matter, and most importantly, that they belong. Because that's the thing we all want. We want to belong. So it may come as a surprise, not to those who I talked to this afternoon, but to most of you, that the National Teacher of the Year never intended to be a teacher. I wanted to be a filmmaker. So I had visions of changing the world with my amazing films. But I quickly learned that my personality wasn't quite suited to filmmaking. And we could go into that, but I won't right now. Really, it comes down to that I needed daily access to hope. So in 1998, I applied to the Peace Corps, and was invited to serve as a teaching volunteer in Armenia. So there I am. So yeah, pretty cute. I was mentioning earlier that someone in a Peace Corps group has to have a guitar. So, but I will say that I wasn't the only one in my group, and I brought mine halfway through. So, but yes, someone has to have a guitar. So my service began in 1999 and ended, I don't want to show you that yet, and ended in 2001. So I'm a bit embarrassed to admit this, but when I was first invited to serve in Armenia, I was like, I'm so excited, I'm going to Armenia! And I had no idea where Armenia was. None. So that's another thing that shows you that we remember not necessarily what we teach, but how we feel, or what we learn. However, in my 2 short years of service, I had so many experiences that challenged my perceptions and opened me up to a whole new world. Not to mention, gave me some knowledge about geography. I remember the discomfort and the struggle of adjusting to life in a new country and culture, the experience of being a newcomer and how much help I needed in my transition to living in this new community. Peace Corps challenged my perceptions, broadened my perspectives, and taught me about connections and building relationships. My deepest connection to this day is with my host family, and I'm going to show you a picture of them a little bit later. They welcomed me with open arms, gave me grace in adjusting to life in Armenia, took my hand, and helped me navigate my new environment. And I carry their example with me in my work as an educator every day. Every day a new student walks into my room, I remember how open and welcoming my family was. And also Mrs. Baker. And I try to be that for my kids. So some of my most vivid memories of my service in Armenia come from the discomfort and challenge of moving to and living in a culture different from my own. So, getting my first haircut. So when I first started, you saw my hair was like down here, but I usually have short hair. So I was like, I think I made it 2 months. And then I was like, I gotta get it cut off. And so during training, this was quite an experience because I didn't know Armenian language yet. I'd only been there for like a month and a half. So I knew so little, so it was hilarious trying to communicate. So I used a bunch of gestures, I tried to explain, and the stylist was so patient with me. And you can see all of the lovely Armenian women there. Slowly, as the event progressed, more and more people came into the room and watched. But she did a tremendous, lovely job. It was the best haircut I had the entire time I was in Armenia. I also remember marshutni rides with total strangers and sharing food with one another. One such experience ended in a particularly nasty bout of giardia. And if you don't know what giardia is, it is awful. I think I lost 2 days in that, like, I don't even remember, 2 full days. That one is particularly poignant because I distinctly remember 2 things about that experience. I remember the connection. So I was there with a stranger, we were in the marshutni, we were getting to know each other. I remember the carrot being washed in the water, like a little tap out of the ground, and not thinking about it because I was so in that connection. And then them handing me the carrot and me going, thank you, or and then eating the carrot. And then the next thing I remember is a horrible pain and being unable to make it to the bathroom. So that memory sparks vivid memories of the various bathrooms I encountered. So one thing about Peace Corps is you end up talking about bathrooms a lot. It makes you very comfortable. As a matter of fact, when I met my husband, he was like, you just really talk about bathroom stuff a lot. And I was like, Peace Corps, I don't know. But I also remember, we called this Garbage Falls because you can't see it, but that little spot of red up at the top is some garbage hanging down, and at the bottom is just a pile of garbage. But it was things like, like it's just different. And it's about accepting and going and learning and being. So I remember the simple tasks that became such a challenge, collecting water once a week. I couldn't use my bathtub because I had to keep water in it. Shopping in the market, doing my laundry. I couldn't do my laundry. I'm just going to admit it right now. I tried really hard, but it made my hands bleed. Because washing jeans in cold water is very rough. So one of my neighbors kindly did my laundry for me. I did pay her, though.
How far from Yerevan were you?
Pretty far. I was the furthest north in the country that you can get. I was in Alaverdi. So basically, I learned about becoming comfortable with discomfort. So Peace Corps really challenged my perception of comfort and happiness. And I realized that for the first time, the two are not necessarily connected. Happiness comes not from efficiency or things or basic creature comforts. Happiness comes from experiences and real connections with other people. Peace Corps also launched me into a 20-year career as a teacher, and I have to add, made me into an expert packer. I'm very good at packing very small bags for long trips. And after ending my service in the Peace Corps in 2001, I moved to Texas, which was more culture shock than going to Armenia. I became a teacher, but I was not a certified teacher at the time, and I didn't have a degree in education. Still, simply based on my teaching experience in the Peace Corps, I was hired as a lead teacher in a high school classroom. So these are important pictures right here because this gives you a little bit of insight into my teaching experience in the Peace Corps. I'll never forget Peace Corps training and my teaching practicum. So back then I was only beginning to understand how to connect with my students and use that knowledge and those connections to build engaging lessons. And so when I look back at the pictures of my teaching experience during training, I feel pride and I also cringe a little. So I hadn't looked at my Peace Corps scrapbook for a really long time until I went to that Peace Corps event last August. And that's when I was really going through. And so now I've been teaching for 20 years. So I've been in the classroom a long time. And so I'm looking back at my pictures and I'm so excited. I'm like, oh, and then I look and I'm like, what was I thinking? And I'm going to tell you why. So I had two classes. I had a 5th grade class and I had an 8th grade class for my practicum. And my 5th grade class was awesome. We did so much and everybody was so engaged and happy and excited. And my 8th grade class was a total disaster. It's not like kids were like jumping up and down and running out of the room or, anything like that, but I just couldn't, they just weren't interested, they were distracted. And yeah, it could be that they're in middle school, but it could also be what I was teaching. So you can see here, this is the 5th grade class. And we have a bunch of pictures. And so our thing that we did at the end of the week, or 2 weeks, I think it was like 14-day practic, I don't remember. But all of our language and stuff culminating in performance of a song, we did You Are My Sunshine, and I changed the words, and I made it all about environmental issues related to Armenia. And so we talked about Lake Savan, and we talked about car exhaust, things that the kids really could relate to. And it was all about Armenia. And then in the 8th grade class, I taught about American Independence Day, and we learned America the Beautiful. Ridiculous. What was I thinking? I was not. Because why in Armenia do they want to learn about American Independence Day? And I will say I did try to connect them. You can see up there the US flag with not enough stars, and then the Armenian flag, because we were roughly in between Armenian independence and US independence. And so I was trying to teach them the language around that. But come on, America the Beautiful? Ridiculous. And it speaks so much about how we are socialized in this United States of America. So looking back, it's so obvious why 5th grade was engaged and excited and 8th grade was not. No wonder they were disengaged and wholly uninterested. I can see this now, but back then I was totally clueless. The thing is, it was everything that followed. It was that experience and everything moving forward, that my experience being the other and adjusting to life in Armenia, that helped me to be the teacher that I am now, and opened me up to being able to see where I went wrong and how not to go wrong moving forward. That's not to say I didn't make several mistakes, because I have made many mistakes throughout my career. But Peace Corps helped me to be reflective, to critically assess my practice as an educator, and to learn from my mistakes, and to always work to be better. And also that it's okay to make mistakes. Because I made mistakes in Armenia all the time. And then going into my classroom for the first time in Texas, I made lots of mistakes. And that's how we learn. That's how we get better. So I now teach in the Newcomer Center. So this is my class from 2017. It's a specialized English language development program at Ferris High School in Spokane, Washington. I teach brand new immigrant and refugees to our nation. I get to be their first teacher in the United States. And every day I apply the lessons I learned in the Peace Corps to impact the lives of my students and to, in turn, be impacted by them. Peace Corps taught me so much about adjustment, to observe, to listen, and to learn before acting. These lessons are invaluable every day in my classroom. And here's one example from 2016. So this is Neruz and Mohammed. They're siblings who came to the United States as refugees from Syria. I was originally told that they had recently lost their hearing due to the bombings in Syria, and that they wore hearing aids to help them hear, and that I would be fitted, or they would be fitted with an AM/FM system, and I would wear a little speaker thing or microphone, and it would amplify my voice for them, and that's all they would need. However, as I waited for these amplification systems to arrive, I realized these students were not understanding anything and were producing zero language, not even sounds. The only thing that they would do is copy things from the board. So one element of this story that also directly relates to my experience in the Peace Corps is my comfort in visiting my students' homes. So as an educator, I am often limited in my knowledge of my students unless I am connected with their family. This is particularly true of newcomer students because they don't have the language to articulate what they need. So as a Peace Corps volunteer, one element that is often not discussed in the frequent invitations volunteers receive to visit neighbors' homes. It's pretty constant. People will even come in the middle of the day and knock and be like, come over. So prior to my service, visiting someone's home whom I did not know well, let alone a home in which English was not the first language, would have been quite daunting. I would have been like, no, thank you. I'm also an introvert, so yeah, just thinking about it makes my heart beat a little bit faster. I can't even say I would be willing to go on a visit like that. But in the Peace Corps, this is a regular event. And culturally, it's an expectation. So I grew comfortable with the challenge of being in an environment vastly different from that which I had experienced growing up. So this made the prospect of doing home visits with my students' families an easy endeavor because it seemed natural. So I now visit every one of my students' homes to see and meet their parents or guardians and see where and how they live and who they are as individual human beings. And those visits are a gift. So here is one of the home visits I did with Neruz and Mohammed. This isn't the first one, it's a subsequent one because we're now very connected. But you can see my family and their family, and we're all together. So it was when I met Neruz and Mohammed's parents that I learned they were not recently deaf. They were profoundly deaf and had been born that way. And that the people in my school district had simply made assumptions based on what they thought they knew, without actually finding out the reality. And as a matter of fact, not only were Neruz and Mohammed deaf, but also one of their other daughters. So of their 4 children, 3 were profoundly deaf. I also learned that they had limited education prior to coming to the United States, and that they were not fluent in Arabic or sign language. The only signs that they knew were ones that they had created in their home in order to communicate with each other. So essentially, these 2 students had no language. I knew I had to adjust my teaching if I was going to meet the needs of these students. I also knew it would take something extra to help create community for them and to help them connect with their classmates. I pulled together a group of advocates at the school, along with working closely with Neruz and Mohammed's parents. I began attending sign language classes with their family, and we soon began to learn basic sign language in class, along with the foundational English we were learning. This helped Neruz and Mohammed to not only communicate their learning, but to also connect with their classmates. Once they had the supports they needed, Nehruz and Mohammed took off. So you can see them there. Nehruz is the second one in, and Mohammed is here. They are doing well in school. They have regular sign language lessons, both inside and outside of school. They have interpreters who attend classes with them, and they both hope to attend Gallaudet University to become sign language instructors. Both of them should graduate, in 2020, so next year. Because Peace Corps taught me not to make assumptions and to adjust based on observation and experience, I was able to meet my students where they were and help them to grow. Peace Corps also taught me to be open to who a person is as an individual. We can't generalize based on culture, country, religion, or any other group to which we believe a person belongs. We simply can't make assumptions. We must allow people to show us who they are, and that means putting our own perceptions and biases aside. That also means first recognizing that we have biases and prejudices. So that takes self-reflection. So this lesson was invaluable when Hussein walked into my classroom in 2012. He was a refugee from Iraq, and he was 20 years old. So in the United States, you can only go to school until you're 21. So we can make a lot of assumptions about a student who decides to attend classes at a high school when they have 1 year, they have no transcripts, and will likely not graduate. There are a lot of things that we can make, a lot of assumptions that we can make. But instead of making those assumptions, I listened and I observed. I learned that Hussein was motivated and that he'd purposely chosen to attend high school instead of going to adult education because he believed he would learn more about American culture and have more opportunities to practice his English. Both are very true. I also learned that he had cut hair for the US Army in Iraq and that it was his dream to be a stylist. So because I waited and allowed Hussein to show me who he was, before making any educational plan for him, I was able to get him into the cosmetology program at the Skills Center. He attended classes there in the morning and then would come back to the center every afternoon to study what he had learned again with me. And I don't know how much you know about cosmetology, but this might change your perception of this a little bit too. It's extremely science heavy. There's a lot of biology and chemistry, and I now know much more about fingernail fungus and skin problems than I ever thought I would ever know. And by the close of his 1 year in high school, he had several hours toward his cosmetology license. It took a couple more years, but in 2016, he graduated from cosmetology school and is now a practicing stylist in Spokane, Washington. He's the one responsible for my haircut. You can see there I am with long hair. One of the only times I had long hair in my life. And there I am, getting my hair cut off. And it was hilarious because it was so hard for him. He was like, "Oh, are you sure?" So he still cuts my hair. And every time he's like, "Are you sure you don't want to grow it out?" And I'm like, you're losing battle. It's going to be short for the rest of my life. So I let Hussein show me who he was, created an education plan based on my knowledge of him, and provided the support and help he needed to achieve his dream. So that's one of my favorite stories. I tell it like as many times as I can. Sometimes I bring Hussein with me, but this is really far from our home. So another lesson that Peace Corps taught me was the power of an individual. Peace Corps is the model of empowerment because half of your job in Peace Corps is creating your own job. So you have your primary job, which is the assignment that you have, but then what you're really there for are your secondary jobs and these other things that you do out in the community, particularly if you're a teaching volunteer, because we're just in the school building, doing stuff. And so to extend all of that, you have to find other things to do. And at first, this is daunting, but then it's extremely empowering. So I learned the value of my own voice and gained the confidence to assert that voice. So my latest project is an example of this recognition, that my voice matters, and that single voice, when combined with passionate, like-minded educators, can become a powerful collective. So Teachers Against Child Detention, I'm wearing this shirt too. So based on my work with immigrant students with drive and focus who only want to give back to the country which welcomed them in, I have gathered a coalition of like-minded educators to create Teachers Against Child Detention. We have come together to fight for the release of immigrant children held across the nation in centers simply for being born outside of the United States. There are almost 15,000 kids being held in these detention centers. So last Sunday, February 17th, on President's Day weekend, hundreds of educators headed to El Paso, Texas to hold a teach-in for freedom. Our message is that all children deserve a quality education, all children have endless potential and deserve to reach that potential, and all children deserve to be free. What made the day so powerful was the work that went into planning the day. We worked closely from the start with organizations who have already been working on advocating for immigrant children and fighting to keep families together. A few of these partners are United We Dream, Teaching Tolerance, Las Americas, and Hope Border Institute. We honored their work and took direction from them based on their vast experience, and then stood side by side in solidarity at the event. We were also able to work closely with our education associations, many of whom sponsored teachers to attend the event. Both the National Education Association, seen here, this is specifically the Hispanic Caucus, and the American Federation of Teachers supported the event and participated. AFT brought several teachers from Juarez, Mexico, to tell their stories, and the NEA Hispanic Caucus also took the stage to share their personal immigration stories. And to top it off, educators from across the nation taught lessons on topics related to immigration and child detention. It was an engaging day, which ended with a strong call to action, to take the lessons back to their communities and classrooms, to engage our community members into action to demand the release of our children. And what made the day truly inspiring, though, was working in collaboration with immigrant advocacy groups, education associations, and educators. There was a sense of honor and respect throughout the entire process. And based on the understanding that is only together that we can truly make change. If any of you are interested in adding your voice to Teachers Against Child Detention, our work has not ended, and it is not too late to join us. We will continue to act and engage our communities until our government's policies on child detention and family separation change. This is a human rights issue, and as educators, it is our duty as mandatory reporters of suspected child abuse to continue speaking out for these children. Children who should not be in detention. They should be in our classrooms. So that's our website, teachersagainstchilddetention.org. So that lesson from Peace Corps that my voice matters, and being empowered to use it has been invaluable to me as an educator. Not only because I am confident in using my voice for my colleagues and for all students, but also because I understand the importance of empowering my students to use their voices to advocate for themselves as well. So Safa came to my classroom in 2012 as a refugee from Sudan. So when Safa came to my classroom, she was 15 years old, and she only had a 4th grade education because of her journey trying to come to the United States. So here she was, 15 years old, a freshman in high school, with the expectation that she'd graduate in 4 years, despite her limited formal education and the fact that she was a brand new English language learner. So when she came, she was at a level 1. So with the confidence she gained and the welcome she received through her first semester spent in the Newcomer Center, she only spent 1 semester with me because she's amazing. And the support of her educators throughout her high school career, Safa did just that. She graduated in 4 years. 4th grade education, graduated in 4 years. So beyond helping Safa to succeed in high school, I also helped Safa to find her voice, as I try to do for all of my students. And I just want to add that not only did Safa graduate in 4 years, she also is now attending Eastern Washington University. She's going to be a junior next year, or no, she's a junior this year. Yes, she's a junior this year. She's going to be a senior at university next year. I'm so proud of her. So I recently took a group of former students to our state capital, and Safa was one of them. And during that trip, Safa testified to the House and Senate K-12 committees on behalf of English language learners. She spoke specifically about the difficulties English language learners encounter with standardized testing. And I just have to add, this isn't in here, but I just have to add that the representative, and I talked to some of the classes about this today, but the representative who invited us down to the Capitol, he's actually a Republican representative, and traditionally votes along party lines. But because he has gotten to know my classroom so well, and because my students spoke up and he met them, and he now, when thinking about policy, envisions these beautiful faces, he is a champion for eliminating standardized testing as a graduation requirement. He introduced a bill in the House that would demand that all legislators, prior to requiring students to take standardized tests, must take the tests themselves. And it's all because of Safa. Yeah, but it was all right. She is an empowered advocate who knows the strength of her voice and the importance of using it. And she was considering becoming a teacher. She has changed that, but I know she'll go back to it. And I know that when she goes into her classroom, she will also empower her students because she was empowered. But the most important thing I learned in the Peace Corps was the power of being welcoming. So I talked about them before, and now you get to see them. It's my host family. That I will never forget the welcome they gave me when I first arrived in Armenia. I had so much to learn. I didn't know the culture, and I didn't know the language, and the family gave me so much grace. I mean, I made cultural blunders all the time, and it was hard to learn Armenian, and they let me fumble through. They took my hand and guided me in learning how to live in my new home, even after I left Vernishin village after training. They still helped me. I'm still in contact with them today. And I have to tell one story because it's so cute. So I had never had a migraine headache before. And for whatever reason, I was walking home from training and I got this splitting headache. And it was making me sick to my stomach. I was getting sick. And my host mom comes out because I barely was making it back home, and she guides me, and she's sitting with me, and she's crying and experiencing the pain with me. And she says, "Mandy John," and she goes, "I have something," and she's saying it in Armenian, but it's been like 20 years, so I don't remember how to say it. But she comes back, and she has this rag, and she goes, "Put this on your head, it will fix it." And so I put it on my head, and it was a rag soaked with vodka. And to this day, I don't know if it was the 2 Tylenol I took, because it was just regular strength, or that vodka-soaked rag. But it cured my headache. And it's something that we experienced together. And then I believe she made me an egg. And we had a good time. So it was that unconditional welcome, that willingness to help me and guide me, that really helped me transition to living and working in Armenia. And that's exactly what we need to do for newcomers to our nation. Welcome them unconditionally, then take their hands and help them to transition to their new life in the United States. We have so much to learn from these amazing individuals we are welcoming into our country. As a returned Peace Corps volunteer, I have the perspective and experience to do just that. Because the true goal of the Peace Corps is not the job assignment. It's the cultural exchange and exposure to that which is different and beautiful. The lessons I learned in the Peace Corps I have carried with me throughout my career. Peace Corps is not simply development, as I said before, it is diplomacy. Volunteers create connections and build relationships to make our world stronger. So I just want to add one story that I heard that's not mine, but I want to share it. So Peace Corps used to be in Afghanistan. And there was a big military victory. It was in recent years. And the U.S. military had helped the Afghani people overcome some crisis. And the community was preparing for the arrival of the Americans to celebrate this victory and the help that they had given that the United States had given. And when the military came out, and the group from Afghanistan came out and they were meeting, the Afghani people said, "Wait a minute, where's Ryan? We thought that the American who helped us was coming." And it was the Peace Corps volunteer who had been in that community. Because it's not military might, it's not weapons, it's not things like that that create strong communities. It's connections. And that's what Peace Corps does. So because of my experiences in the Peace Corps, I'm more open to different ways of thinking, being, and doing. And I take these lessons and these skills into my classroom every day and in every action I take. The message and I spread as the National Teacher of the Year. Peace Corps and its mission of cultural exchange and connection shows us we must build bridges rather than walls. Be welcoming, show love, and build strong, safe communities through connection. Peace Corps is social justice in action. It is a model we can use not only abroad, but here in our own communities. Because it is a difficult time in our nation. Our silence and our unwillingness to confront issues of racism, sexism, and classism have allowed systems of oppression to grow, spread, and damage our society. To tackle these issues on a global scale feels impossible. So in order to confront, challenge, and change for the better, we must act locally. So what is your passion? What change do you want to see in our world, and how is that reflected right here in your own community? So let's take a moment to just think about that. What do you want to change, and how can that start right here? So take a moment to turn to your neighbor and talk about what you were just thinking about. All right, so the next question is, now that we have identified a problem, what are the impacts of that problem and why do we care? Who is impacted by what you just talked about? And why do they matter to us? So think about who is most impacted by the topic you were just talking about. Because it's important to know who we're fighting for. So with that understanding, what's a possible solution? That's a hard one. But it's also something that's really important. You identify a problem, you identify who is impacted and why that matters, and then you have to come up with solutions. Because we can't make change unless we have some solutions. Do you have a possible solution in mind? It's hard. Okay. So I'm going to let you skip talking about that one, but I'm going to make you talk about the next one. So, because the next part is the hard part. What's one action you can take today or tomorrow, since it's kind of late, to confront or challenge that problem? And will you make a commitment to acting? So what's your action? And will you commit to doing that action? And it might not solve the problem yet, but it's a step. So I want you to turn to your partner, tell them what you're going to do, and promise that you will follow through and do it. Go. Waterfall. Shh. So magical. Okay, so the reason that I made you articulate that to your neighbor is because once you say something out loud and you say it to another person, then you're held accountable. We are more likely to follow through when we say out loud what we're going to do, because you don't want to let your neighbors down. So I like this quote from Rose in The Last Jedi. I believe that Star Wars is very important. It's not about fighting what we hate, it's about saving what we love. It's not enough to simply identify a problem, because then we are fighting what we hate. We must recognize what we are fighting for and frame our work through that lens. When you go out and you have experiences, it's a lot easier to see what we're fighting for. Because you put a face to your neighbors. And not just the neighbors in the room directly next to you, but the neighbors in the next country. That's how we make our world better. We save what we love. And in that way, we ensure that everyone, especially our young people, have what they need, know they are wanted, that they are enough, that they matter, and most importantly, that they belong. Thank you.